Chapter 2 The Village. When the ship had finally sailed out of sight, Chandra enthusiastically started chatting to the fairy. "Did you see that ship? It was so cool. I can't believe a boat can fly." "Well, you can fly, so that must not be that crazy for you. For me, though, I can hardly believe my eyes." Without waiting for the fairy to answer, Chandra continued. "My name is Chandra. What's yours?" Pausing expectantly, she waited for the fairy to respond. The fairy's eyes seemed a little glazed before Chandra nudged her shoulder playfully. "Oh, my name is Ember." "Ember! Well, that's a beautiful name," she exclaimed, as they followed the butler up the hill. Chandra and Ember glanced at each other in awe as they approached a large castle that they had seen through the trees. It was a magnificent structure. Made from gray stone, it towered high into the air. With several tall towers that seemed to pierce the sky, it was an amazing structure to behold, and just for a second Chandra forgot what she was saying and just walked in stunned silence. Philip turned to them and smiled solemnly. "It is beautiful, isn't it? This is going to be your home for a long while, so there will be plenty of time to soak it in." Chandra looked at him. How could one look so serious while smiling? "Ember," she asked quietly when Philip turned back around, "do you suppose he's human? He seems way too serious to be human. I am pretty sure he's a robot, or maybe someone's mannequin." "Yes, that's got to be it." Chandra laughed, and Ember joined her. Philip glanced back to them, raising an eyebrow, but then continued leading them on the way. The path they were on continued toward the outer walls that wrapped around the castle. Chandra looked down again at her clothes. They seemed to be covered in flowers of a huge variety. "Look, Ember, I am pretty sure I have a flower of every color imaginable on my clothes. What do you think? Maybe since you get wings, I get magical flowers." Ember smiled at her. "I think you're what they call a dryad, Chandra. A spirit that dwells in the forest, so maybe you do have flower magic." Chandra hadn't really thought that she had been right, but at Ember's words, she perked up even more. "Really? You really think so? That would be so cool." While they had been talking, the path had come up alongside the outer wall surrounding the castle. Chandra already felt small, but walking beside the wall made her feel tiny. It towered over her and seemed to stretch to the sky. As she looked further down the wall, she could see that a tower stood in the corner, overlooking all its surroundings. She glanced behind her, and the wall seemed to stretch on forever, with trees brushing up against and more towers breaking up its long length. Chandra could see at least two more towers in the stretch of wall they were walking along. As they drew closer to the tower, Chandra could see that it had to be at least 5 stories high. How did someone build something so massive? As they rounded the tower, a bustling village came into view. Chandra's jaw dropped at the chaos that presented her eyes. People seemed to be everywhere, and not just regular people, but more fairies like Ember, centaurs, satyrs, animals that walked upright and almost looked humanoid. The mix was astonishing to Chandra. Ember had stopped in her tracks as well, soaking up the incredible sight just as much as Chandra was. "Wow, that's a lot of people," Ember finished Chandra's sentence. "People" was said very hesitantly, as if she wasn't sure it was an appropriate description for what they were witnessing. Ember reached over and closed Chandra's mouth. "We probably shouldn't gawk too much." Chandra shook her head, smiled up at Ember, and gave a small chuckle. "Right. Yes, let's not do too much of that. But wow, this was not how I saw my day going. Well, I didn't really know how it would go in the first place, since I have no memory of how it was going." Ember laughed at Chandra and grabbed her hand as they ran to catch up with Philip, who either hadn't noticed them to stop to gawk, or didn't care to stop and wait for them too. As they entered the village, a large structure was easily picked out from amongst some of the smaller buildings that surrounded the wall. "Look, Ember," Chandra said, pointing to the large building. "That looks like a church." "Ha! Still can't get away from God in a crazy place like this." Amber looked at where Chandra was pointing. The building was tall and had a spire on the top. It did resemble a church. In fact, it reminded Chandra of a Mormon church, almost just older looking. Or maybe it wasn't old, it just looked, well, she wasn't sure exactly what it looked, except that it was different. She tugged on Philip's sleeve. Hey, sir, excuse me. She waited for him to look before badgering him with her curiosity. Why do you guys have a church? Do you still need God in this strange place? Is it just for looks? Or is that some kind of magic building where they perform special rituals on people? Chandra asked the question so fast that the poor butler couldn't get a word in. When Chandra paused for a second and looked at him quizzically, he opened his mouth to respond. Chandra fired another question at him before he could respond. You know, this is an awfully big place. I am not sure just one church would service this many people. And are you guys going to build more? Do people just take turns saying hi to God? Philip coughed loudly, and Chandra stopped, mouth open, realizing that she was asking too many questions too fast for anyone to answer. Oops, she said abashed. Sorry. Philip smiled graciously, nodded his head, accepting her apology. Yes, that is a church. A Mormon one, to be exact, with medieval architecture to fit in. There are several located here in East Castle. It was so solemn and slow, Chandra didn't know how he could possibly get anything done speaking at that rate. As they continued through the village, Philip pointed out more structures. There is the mess hall, Philip said, pointing to a very large pavilion as they walked along the street. The pavilion was enormous and towered over a large assortment of tables and chairs where people were seen laughing and talking while they ate their meal. The smell wafting from the mess hall mesmerized Chandra's nose. Sniffing loudly. That smells so good, Chandra said. She stared pointedly at Philip, but he didn't get the memo and continued walking, pointing to more buildings. Chandra sighed heavily and trudged after him. Amber gave her a consoling glance, sharing in her desire to stop the mess hall. When do we actually go to the mess hall? Chandra asked Philip before he could explain what the next building was about. He sighed. Since your soul form is so new, it is unnecessary for it to need nourishment yet. You will still need to feed it on occasion, but not like you are used to, feeding your body. Don't worry though, you will have plenty of opportunities to try out the mess hall and the delicacies it provides. Soul form, Chandra thought. Her steps faltered for a moment. What's a soul form? Not like my body. She looked down at her hands. It felt like her body. It felt real. What was he talking about? It made no sense. Before she could open her mouth to ask more questions, Philip continued talking. I know, it's very confusing, and you have lots of questions, but I will ask you to refrain from asking them now. All will be answered in due course. Chandra snapped her mouth closed and followed Philip as he motioned them forward. Amber glanced at Chandra, and Chandra shrugged dramatically. While pretending to zip her mouth closed, Amber gave a small laugh, and together the girls followed Philip through the bustling village. The sheer size of the village was daunting to Chandra as Philip continued to give them a tour. Chandra wasn't even sure you could call this a village. It was almost more like a city, just very old, and there were new buildings everywhere, and half-built buildings, and even some tents. How was she ever going to remember where everything was? There were more churches, more mess halls and lecture halls. Philip had given each lecture hall a different name, but Chandra had already forgotten them. Some of the halls were open, with large bench areas that looked to hold 50 to 100 people, and some were enclosed with large glass windows that allowed them a quick glance at rooms filled with students. Sometimes a few, sometimes a lot, and they would all be doing all sorts of things. As they continued, the building that caught Chandra's attention the most was an enormous structure. Built of polished stone, it towered at least 3 stories in the air and cast a shadow wide and long as they moved closer to it. The building was circular, with high arches all around it that led to staircases leading upwards. This is the East Castle Stadium. He waved his hands grandly at the magnificent structure. This is where you will have your orientation tomorrow. It is also where all general assemblies are held, training exercises, competitions between teams, and it can be used for entertainment purposes as well. Chandra stared in awe at the structure. It reminded her of a Roman Colosseum. The grandeur of the building was undeniable. "How many people can that hold?" she asked Philip. "About 5,000 people more if necessary." Chandra just nodded her head in amazement, unable to voice her awe. Ember nudged her. "Cat got your tongue?" she said teasingly. Chandra nodded her head emphatically. Philip led them away from the building and down another street. Chandra didn't remember much of what he was saying as they continued to walk. It was just so much for her to take in. As the sun began to go down, they passed by large fields. It all looked so unreal to Chandra. It was like she was walking straight into a movie set. These are some of the training grounds. Some new recruits will learn basic battle skills, how to work in teams, and tactical units. They will train you in a little of everything, but whatever you show the most skill with will be your primary weapon. Chandra raised her hand. Um, excuse me, sir? Why do we need to learn to fight? Her voice quavered at the mere thought of fighting someone. Philip smiled comfortingly at her. "I know this is a lot to take in. Not everyone will end up in the field fighting, but it is imperative that everyone knows how to at least control their magic. Your mentors and captains will guide you every step of the way." Chandra nodded slowly. "Control our magic? So we do have magic?" Her eyes got big, and she began to jump up and down. "What's mine? When do I get to start learning? Is it an awesome magic? Can I move stuff with my mind? Can I do lots of things or just one? Is it hard to learn?" The butler held up his hand, and Chandra stopped and smiled bashfully. "Sorry," she said meekly. "All these questions and more will be answered." He paused, turning to include both girls. "It's been a long day, exciting day. As you were part of the last of the bunch coming through today, we have lots to still prep for your group tomorrow. So I will be showing you to your temporary housing for the night, and tomorrow, first thing in the morning, will be orientation, where most of your questions will be answered." Chandra went to open her mouth, but before she could, Philip held up his hand, his eyes asking her to not ask any more questions. He motioned them back toward the village and away from the training grounds. The village was still abuzz with activity, but it had seemed to lessen some as the sun began to set. This part of the village seemed to have fewer permanent structures and half-built structures and more tents. Some very large tents seemed to hold tools and other materials, and the small tents looking to be where people slept for the night. As they continued to walk, the buildings became far less and the tents took over everything. They were in organized rows, a new tent presenting itself every time they walked around one. If Chandra was a claustrophobic person, this might have been unbearable, but the sheer amount and the craziness of the situation just excited her, and she could barely keep down the barrage of questions she wanted to ask Philip. As they walked up a small hill, Chandra was finally able to see over the tents. She froze, utterly astounded by the sight that presented itself to her. Tents and more tents stretched in every direction. The village lay behind her. Between her and the village were so many tents. "How?" was all she could manage. Amber looked equally awed by the sight. Philip responded, "The new recruits are coming in faster than we can house them. So while permanent structures are being built, they must live in the temporary housing until the new structures are built. If you'll keep following me, your tent is right this way." He motioned them down the hill, and a few paths later he had stopped right out front of a small tent. It was white like most of the other tents, in a V shape holding up a wooden frame. Philip turned to them and smiled politely. Here are your quarters. You will find bedrolls and a small chest for your belongings. In the chest are a few things to help you get more orientated, such as a few rules and the clothing changes you might require. Anything else you might need tonight is already in the tent. Someone will wake you in the morning and bring you to orientation. Thank you, Ember said. Chandra nodded her head as well, not sure she could stop the barrage of questions she had if she opened her mouth. Philip bowed, turned, and was soon swallowed up in the sea of tents. Chandra sighed heavily. Are you sure this isn't all a dream? I am pretty sure I am about to wake up any second and laugh at the silliness of my dream. Ember laughed at Chandra's words, and Chandra joined her. It was such an impossible situation they found themselves in. Ember led the way forward into the small tent, stooping slightly as they entered. It was as small inside as it was outside. There were 2 bedrolls laid out on each side of the tent, leaving a small walk space of about 2 feet. A small lantern hung from the center tent pole. At the end of each bedroll was a small chest. Upon examining the chest, the girls found that they held a pair of boots each, a small writing book, a pouch that could be tied around the waist or put over their shoulders, and a thinly rolled up scroll. Upon closer examination of the scroll, they discovered that it had the rules that Philip had been talking about. Rule number 1. Curfew is at sundown, and no one is allowed out of their personal quarters after that. Rule number 2. Magic is only to be used with permission. Anyone caught misusing it would be severely punished. Rule number 3. There would be no switching of personal quarters. Rule number 4. Leaving East Castle is strictly prohibited without written permission. Rule number 5. All classes and training were to be attended. Tardiness or absentees would not be tolerated. Wow, said Chandra. They're pretty strict. Ember looked up from reading her own scroll. Well, if I was in charge of this many people, I'd want there to be as little problems as possible. Chandra shrugged her shoulders. I suppose. What do you suppose that is at the bottom of the page? Ember looked back at her page. She read the scroll slowly. For your change of clothes, change nightwear. For power testing, air spin. Chandra looked curiously over Ember's shoulder. That's not what mine says. She pointed to the bottom of Ember's page. At least not the end part. Mine says, for power testing, plants grow. What do you suppose that means, Ember? Those words are very strange. And look at the bottom. It says, to activate all spells. Awaken that which lies within me, that which sleep stir to life. Let magic soar free once more. I don't even know what that means. When Chandra said the last word, a small chill ran up her spine. She suddenly felt like she could do anything. She looked back at the paper and said the words again. She paused as she felt the chill run up her again. Then slowly she said, plants grow. At first, she didn't notice any changes. Darn, I don't think it's a magic spell. Nothing happened, she said, disappointed. Then Ember gasped and pointed to the grass under Chandra's feet. The grass, which had been short, was slowly growing up Chandra's leg. Not all the grass, but a few of the strands stretched long, waving softly in the air. Chandra squealed, jumping up in delight, nearly knocking her head on the tent post. This is so exciting! Did you see that, Ember? I did magic! She could barely contain herself as she did a little happy dance. Ember laughed with her, just as excited as Chandra was. Both girls could hardly believe what had just happened. When Chandra finally settled down, both girls looked back at the scrolls. So these must be the words that start the magic, and then these other ones must be the commands, Ember said. That makes sense, Chandra said. Did you feel a tingle? You said those words, Ember? I did. Both times I said it. Amber shook her head. No, but I feel, she paused, unable to describe what she felt. It's just different. Well, don't just sit there. Try one. Chandra could barely contain her excitement. Ember spoke the words softly. Nothing happened. Ember looked around her to see if the grass had started to grow, but nothing moved. Slowly the air around them seemed to change. Ember held out her hand, and a small wind twister formed on her palm. Just enough of a wisp of air swirled to make it visible. It lasted for just a few seconds before disappearing. Wow, Chandra exclaimed. I want to try that too. That was so cool. She said the words just like Ember, but nothing happened. She thrust out her palm, her brow furrowing with concentration with no effect. Finally she slumped. It doesn't work. Ember patted her. Maybe that's why we had different spells. What works for you doesn't work for me, and what works for me doesn't work for you. To prove this, Ember tried Chandra's spell, and sure enough, the grass didn't move. Feeling a little less disappointed, Chandra laid back on her bed. Can you believe we can do magic? This all seems so unreal, but so amazing. Like a dream come true. What do you suppose we're supposed to do about our clothes? Chandra asked. I don't know, Ember replied, her face showing her confusion. He said we had the clothes we needed. I hope they don't expect us to wear the same clothes forever. That sounds very smelly and gross. Chandra laughed as Ember pinched her nose and wafted her hand under it as though she was smelling the worst thing in the world. Can you imagine? Chandra said. No one would want to come within a mile of us. They'd all probably pass out before they even got that close, Ember said, and began laughing. Both girls laughed, holding their bellies while they laughed. A few minutes later, Chandra sat up, holding her stomach from all the laughing. This really is all so strange, she said somberly, her mood changing quickly. I have so many questions, and my brain keeps telling me that none of this is possible or even remotely real. Do you remember anything? I don't. I can't remember anything before coming out of that pond. Amber lay on her back, no longer laughing, just staring at the tent wall. I don't understand either, she said, her hand reaching back, feeling the wings on her shoulders. They had neatly folded themselves behind her back when she had entered the tent. Chandra didn't know if she had told them to, or if she had even done it, or they had just done it on their own. It's all so amazing and beautiful, but different. I can't remember anything either, but this does feel like a dream. Maybe it will feel more real tomorrow, or at least make more sense. Ember's voice was soft, but she seemed very unsure of herself as she finished her sentence, which didn't help Chandra feel any better about what was happening. Ember, Chandra said. Ember turned her head away from gazing at the tent wall and looked at Chandra. I really like you. You're the only person I know right now in the whole world. It was crazy, but true. Chandra literally had no one else that had experienced anything else with. It scared her, but she felt like if Ember was with her, then she would be okay. I like you too, Chandra, Ember said softly. Great. Then let's promise to try to stay together as much as possible. The world seems less scary to me if I know you'll be there to help me with all this strange stuff, Chandra said quickly, not wanting Ember to disagree with her before she could finish. Ember smiled. Agreed. Chandra leaned forward and gave Ember a big hug. Ember returned it. Chandra felt better and was ready to settle down for the night, wondering if the questions running around in her head would ever let her sleep. She laid back on her own bed. Now, if only they had provided some pajamas, I'd be all set. Chandra looked back at the scroll. She had forgotten about it already. What do you suppose they mean by changing nightwear? Ember studied her scroll. I am not sure, but it's worth a try to see what it does. We probably have to say the bottom words first and then that. So Chandra tried it, holding out her hand like Ember had to make her wind twister. Nothing happened. Guess it doesn't work for me, she said, disappointed. Ember laughed excitedly and pointed at Chandra. No, look, it did work. Chandra looked down at herself. Her flowery tunic and pants were gone and had been replaced by a long white nightgown. Chandra sat bolt upright, exclaiming loudly, Ember, look at my clothes! Ember, do you see this? Ember laughed. Yes, Chandra, it worked. The spell worked. My clothes, they changed. I was just in the flowery tunic, and now I'm in this. You did see my clothes earlier, right? I am not crazy. Chandra said it all so fast that Ember barely had a chance to breathe. Ember nodded her head. You weren't wearing that just a moment ago. You're not crazy. Chandra sighed with relief. Your turn, Ember. You try. Okay, said Ember, and she slowly closed her eyes, furrowing her brows in concentration. Slowly she spoke the words. As Chandra watched, nothing seemed to be happening, and then, between one blink to the next, Ember's clothes changed to match Chandra's, a long, simple white nightgown replacing what she had been wearing. Chandra whooped loudly. That's so cool! She covered her mouth quickly, realizing just how loud she had been and the fact that there were other tents close by that she had probably disturbed. Ember's eyes had flown open at Chandra's exclamation, and she was now admiring her own clothes as well. Do you think we can change it back? Chandra asked in a much quieter voice, but no less excited. Ember shrugged again, and together both girls closed their eyes. This time Chandra pictured herself in a beautiful gown that she imagined a princess might wear, and said the words loud and clear. Slowly she opened her eyes and peeked down at her clothes. Unfortunately, it was not a beautiful gown, but her original clothes. Ember was also back in her first outfit as well. Why do you look so sad, Chandra? It worked, Ember asked. I was picturing a beautiful gown, not this, she said, plucking at her pants. Ember laughed. Well, maybe that takes more practice, or maybe this spell only comes with 2 forms. Chandra perked up a little. Maybe. That would be cool if there were more magic clothes spells. Ember changed her clothes back to white pajamas, and Chandra followed suit. Ember blew out the lantern, and together they lay down in their bedrolls and pulled the blankets up to their chins. Chandra whispered her spell again and played with the long grass as it grew up to reach her fingers. It wasn't a particularly cold night, but the blanket felt warm and comforting to Chandra. She snuggled deeper into the blanket, her toes touching the bottom of the bedroll. A loud crash happened outside of the tent, and both girls jumped, sitting up in their beds. What was that? Chandra asked. Ember shrugged her shoulders, and together they climbed toward the opening in the tent. Popping their heads out, they were greeted by a strange sight. A slender boy, looking to be in his early teens with pointy ears and long blonde hair, stood in the small area between the tents. As they watched, he shot flames into the air with his hands. Both girls gasped in shock. It only lasted for a moment, and then disappeared. But then, once again, the boy shot flames into the air. This time, it lasted a little bit longer. Gaston! A voice shouted. The boy jumped and spun around. As the girls watched, a soldier dressed in full armor with large wings sprouting from his shoulders appeared between the tents. Not much could be seen of the soldier under his blue armor, but he was tall and seemed to tower over Gaston. Yes? Gaston stammered. It is past sunset, and the rules state you are supposed to be in bed, the soldier commanded, his voice gruff and deep. But sir, I can't do my spell in my tent, the boy squeaked. The soldier folded his arms over his chest. This does not mean that you can break the rules. But it's so cool. See? Gaston raised his hand again, and after mumbling something the girls couldn't hear, he shot more flames into the air. The rule is the rule. If you return to your quarters right now, there will be no punishments. If you continue. The soldier let the words hang in the air, their implication well implied with his heavy tone of voice. Chandra had no doubt that the man was quite serious. Gaston did not seem to sense the trouble he was in, however, and continued to whine at the soldier. But it's so cool! He shot more flames from his hands. Why should I do as you say anyways? Who put you in charge? The soldier seemed to loom over Gaston, and the boy shrunk back, realizing too late that he might have made a mistake. I am one of the heralds, whose task is to protect, defend, and enforce the rules and laws of East Castle. I am required to make sure all recruits strictly follow all rules and guidelines. Herald, the boy stumbled over the unfamiliar word. Yes, herald. We are ancient beings you call angels. We are highly skilled in combat and are tasked with keeping you safe and make sure you abide by all rules. The boy's mouth had dropped open while the herald talked, the shock in his face clear. Yes, sir, he stammered. He began to turn away from the herald when his knee buckled and he grabbed his arm, crying out in pain. You're hurting me! Stop! It is not me. It is you not controlling your magic properly. You overexerted yourself, and were not supposed to make a flame bigger than a candle. Now come with me. You'll need to get checked out at the infirmary. Now the boy was openly crying, big tears pouring down his face. The captain will deal out punishment later. For now you must come with me. I will try to get you a lightened punishment since this is your first day. The boy yelped in pain again, grabbing at his other arm this time. The herald quickly propelled him between the tents, disappearing from sight. Chandra watched them as they disappeared, a little shaken by the exchange. Together, her and Ember laid back in their bedrolls, neither really saying much. Finally, Chandra broke with the silence. Do you think he's okay? I hope so, Ember replied. Chandra didn't know what else to say, so she rolled over, pulling the blanket up under her chin. Good night, Ember, she said. Good night, Ember replied. Chandra stared up into the darkness of the tent, questions buzzing around her head. Before she knew it, though, her eyes had drifted shut, and she had fallen into Sleep's sweet embrace.